Don't go anywhere. 2 more sessions before we finish. And now it's time to put a value on the role of women in business. This next session, it's about catalyzing women's entrepreneurship to redefine prosperity and end poverty. It's sponsored by by IDE, and you will hear the announcement of an ambitious 10-year strategy to deliver impact at scale. So please welcome to the stage Hanne LeCount, Lizz Welch, and Pearl Uzokwe.
Wonderful, and welcome to today's discussion. As Gustavo mentioned, catalyzing, we're in action mode, women's entrepreneurship to redefine prosperity and end poverty. Thrilled to be here with Pearl and Lizz as we talk through a very important conversation linked to women's economic empowerment. Just as a natural extension of this last conversation, the role of public-private partnerships to drive change towards communities, to lift up through strategic investment. We know from some of the past partnerships and past P3 Impact Award applicants the critical role of women in this cycle. And not to be overly biased here, but I agree with that. We're going to talk about the untapped potential of women's entrepreneurship to lift up households and communities. We're going to talk about how the fundamentals of when you invest in women, when women are in charge of the household income, women are in charge of their expenses, the household income can increase by as much as 5%. And that when women are business owners or able to unlock capital, that families and communities can increase as much as 20% in terms of dietary diversity, food security, and overall resilience. And these are the foundational skills to healthy economies, healthy lives. So, how do we get there? That's what we're going to talk about today with both Lizz and Pearl, two fantastic champions for this conversation. And I want to just do a special plug for IDE, our partner in this conversation. You heard from Trang in the last session what this group does not do around the world. Goodness. Okay, so Lizz, let's talk about it. Let's get there first. IDE's new 10-year strategy. It aims to deliver impact at scale. How do you envision the role of healthy, resilient market ecosystems in accelerating women's entrepreneurship and closing that global gender gap? It's a big question.
That is a big question.
But it's Monday, so you're still full of energy.
Yes.
We'd go a little bit softball on Wednesday, but Monday we're going to hit the hard stuff.
Absolutely. Well, the role of resilient market ecosystems is absolutely necessary to be able to ensure inclusive business happens. So what does that mean? It means breaking down the barriers for women to be able to enter the market, to be able to produce goods and services that deliver a social impact. We often see barriers like access to finance, owning property, land titles, and being able to break down some of these barriers in order to get more inclusive businesses into the market is necessary to be able to deliver impact in the communities where we work.
Pearl, you're working in these we're all living in communities, but you're working in some of the communities where Lizz is referencing, and specifically with your role at Africa Forward through Catalyst 2030. You're seeing some of those barriers. What are some of the lessons? What are some of the lived pieces? And how can what you've learned about empowering women in these spaces towards the SDGs be part of the strategy that IDE is launching?
Thank you. Honestly, I keep saying this, I think that when it comes to attaining the SDGs, you absolutely have the tools in your hands with the women that we've seen. It's been incredibly encouraging. I mean, the data doesn't lie. When you look at the data coming out of ILO, we have 40% of the social entrepreneurs being women. When you look at what they're reinvesting again back into the communities, the data is not lying. It's saying it's 90%. You were joking and saying not to pitch men against women, but it's just looking at those numbers. It's 90% being reinvested in communities, in those businesses, in comparison to somewhere around 30 to 40% for the men. And so when it comes to gender equity markers, it's absolutely showing us that we need to do even more to support these women. creating initiatives that are really targeting these women as well to ensure that you're getting them to where we need them to be. And the attainment of the SDGs right now is certainly on course and will be fast-tracked with the continued support of women in these communities. And so, if you just repeat the question, the last question again.
Yeah, when you're thinking about that experience of, you think you said 90%
Yes.
investing in?
Reinvesting.
So, reinvesting in, excuse me. What is the barrier then? Why is this not a no-brainer to everybody? What are some of the elements that you come into and see in effect that are still making this a conversation, even though the data's there, even though the returns are there, and the vehicles or facilities to get this money out there is there?
I would say that barriers like education, for example, and I think that there's so much more that can be done to really support these women in industry. I think that. So there's so much more that can be done to support women in industry. The women are basically contributing to these businesses. They're reinvesting. Sorry.
No, it's good.
You're good.
This is such an important message to get out, and time goes fast. We want to get it right. We're good.
I think what you found is that the women, for example, when they're investing in these businesses, you see that they're not just focused on the financial returns. It's very emotional for me sometimes to speak about this, because the truth is you see that they take and they have a lot of empathy for the problems that are happening in these societies. Take, for example, one of the women that I've spoken to recently, and her desire to solve the problems came out of a real need. And she had a daughter who was basically physically challenged, and she was basically told, take your child who had this disability, go home and have more children. Forget about this child and put the child in a home. And that, of course, was a disaster for her. And looking at where she was, this was 30 years ago, she decided she was going to put her money where her mouth was and started designing these mobility equipment and wheelchairs for her daughter, first of all, and then it became a really solid business. 30 years on, this is a business that has basically created a multiplier effect. It's returning over $50 million in terms of returns over the years. It has supported families because she understands that it's not just about financial returns, but also about supporting the families who are in these spaces. And so they're providing support on the policy side as well with governments in these countries. She's working out of South Africa, an incredible business called Uzokwe SE in South Africa. And I think what it means is just you have to really give women the space to really come up with these innovative solutions that are fit for purpose. So they had wheelchairs, but you didn't have wheelchairs that could basically go into the off-road tracks that you had in South Africa. And so she's come in and said, don't just provide the wheelchairs, but also support, give them the psychosocial support that is required, and ensure that it's holistic. In doing that, she's become a disability activist. In doing this support as well, she's really helped her reform on the continent. And so, it's encouraging to see the various multiplying effects that the support for women can have in these environments.
That's such an encouraging and inspiring anecdote from Uzokwe.
Yes.
And the way that this individual has created impact far beyond what was perhaps anticipated, which is a fantastic segue into M&E. So Liz, let's talk about monitoring and evaluation. This is so central to the IDE model and work. How are you approaching this when there are so many different variables, and admittedly, some of them are probably unknown from the starting point for a juncture. So how will you evaluate this strategy? How will you think through it?
Yeah, I love that question. I have to say, Pearl, that was the perfect setup, because we're really focused in our new strategy, not only on income, which we've always focused on relentlessly, but really looking at prosperity beyond income alone. So as Pearl was describing how the woman that she worked with is creating and reinvesting more in her community, we've created a set of, we're using a set of standardized key performance metrics that look at, we call them our prosperity indicators, because what we found from directly talking with people, we asked them, how do you define prosperity? What does it mean to you to live a prosperous life? And we heard time and time again, people want to invest in education, they want to have access to healthcare, they want to have affordable housing, and so many other things. So we're looking at not only what happens when a family increases their income, but are they able to access these other services? Can they afford to be able to access these other services as a result of the work that we're doing and the reinvestment that's happening at the community level?
Pearl, I want to bring you into this idea of defining the prosperity indicators. How does Africa Forward approach this? How do you see this happening? And importantly, because we are at Concordia, what's the role of public-private collaboration in this and bringing in additional voices?
Wow, I think.
You see how I got like 7 questions into that?
I know, you rolled it all in. No, I think it's really important because what you realize is the definition of prosperity and success really differs depending on what country, the context, what is going on in that particular environment. And what you keep seeing women show time and time again, that it's not just about the financial. And that's something that we have certainly taken into consideration. So we have businesses where you've seen that they're making millions of dollars. But what is even more important, for example, is this psychosocial support that they're giving to families, or the policy changes and the reforms that we know will be absolutely long-lasting. And so for Africa Forward, we're saying we want to just bring about systemic change so that it's not just about today, but it's looking at how we can ensure that it's there for years and decades to come. Indicators for us would also look at, for example, how is it affecting, for example, health in that particular community? Is it education as well? Because we see that constantly being shown. We have, for example, within our ecosystem, there's a wonderful woman who is doing incredible work with just empowering data. Data is a major issue for us on the African continent. There's a dearth of it. And she's taken up the time. Rose Maruru, who's Kenyan, there might be some Kenyans in the house, and she said, we want to just build out this ecosystem and support with data for CSOs in this ecosystem so that they can access additional finance, you can strengthen their skills, you can really improve their bargaining power. And she's created something that's also the very first in Africa. It's an assessment tool for these CSOs as well, which has meant that they have greater access to finance, they can build out their businesses. And so it's great to just see how these women, understanding the problems that they have, redefining the various indicators. And one thing that's clear is that most times the financial is not satisfactory. It's not enough for them. They're looking at other indicators and it spreads across. So it's encouraging.
Yeah. Liz, anything that you want to speak to about, again, that practice of building these partnerships or these elements?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say public-private partnerships are the key to getting any work done. Each actor has a role to play in order to deliver impact at scale. And so, for example, in our work, when we work in sanitation with ministries of health, or we work in education, we work in agriculture with ministries of agriculture, it's understanding what the public sector strategy is, understanding what is being served on the private sector side, and then what bridging role that nonprofit CSOs can play to help make that ecosystem work and accelerate, finding the niches where everything is getting dropped, or even identifying where there's too many cooks in the kitchen, which happens.
Absolutely.
Do you find those partners willing to have those conversations? Not about the too many cooks in the kitchen, but are you being brought into those conversations? Or are you pursuing them? What's the general mode here?
Both.
Both.
And I would say typically when you start, you're pursuing a little bit more, and then once you've had an effective partnership, then they start to just bring you in naturally.
Yeah. I can certainly relate to that. It's like proof of concept in some places. Well, yeah, to just get, I think with within the African context, yes, you've got the public-private partnerships and the support that you need, but then also sometimes you really forget that there are other players in the ecosystem that really can support that. So if I think about it, there are initiatives where really, even with the public sector support, without the support of, for example, the chiefs in certain communities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so important, that localization context. There's not a plug and play. But with that daunting, local adaptation and the time that goes into it, Liz, I would welcome you to share more with this audience about this announcement, about this strategy, and how you plan to pursue it. So I'm going to kind of pass it over to you.
Okay, to the
podium.
All right, here we go.
We're in presentation mode.
So I'm excited to share more about our strategy today, and I wanted to start off with a question for everyone in the room. have you ever experienced a woman's fury?
My husband just laughed in the corner. Oh, yeah.
Well, for many of you, that saying might bring to mind, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And while that saying plays on stereotypes of women being angry, I actually love it when the word scorn is dropped. Hell hath no fury like a woman. Because when it comes to the well-being of her family, a woman will do everything she can to see them survive and thrive. And at IDE, we want to ignite the power of women and women entrepreneurs to end poverty and unlock prosperity. Last year, I was fortunate to meet a woman in Zambia named Salima, who's a mother, a sister, and a friend. And Salima owns multiple agricultural shops that sell seeds and fertilizers to more than 5,000 farmers in her community. When I spoke with Salima, I could see the pride on her face as she shared about how her businesses were bringing prosperity, not just to her, but also to her neighbors. I also met another woman named Alice, who was also a farmer. She was inspired by Salima's successful business and decided through her own efforts and guided by Salima's example to become an entrepreneur and business owner herself. And stories like Salima and Alice, where they each go about their work with a fury to create well-being and lasting prosperity for the communities, and not just for their own family and their neighbors, but really reaching for greater communities across their country. So over the last 40 years, IDE has been relentless in our goal to increase the incomes of people in the countries where we work. In our first 30 years, we increased the incomes of 20 million people. And in the last 10, we doubled that and increased the incomes of 21 million people. Like Salima and Alice, we approach this work with a fury, and stories like theirs give us a blueprint for how we can accomplish our new goal for the next 10 years. IDE's goal is to power 1 million women entrepreneurs to foster prosperity in their communities for 100 million people. To do this, we're on a mission to come alongside women entrepreneurs in the Global South and support them in utilizing tools and the skills that they already have to produce change that is sustainable and where the impact of each investment grows far beyond income alone. Our global community has focused on the poverty line for too long. The women we work with, the women who live in the countries you're here representing, want more for their families and their communities. We can't continue to measure progress by the number of people who haven't starved to death. It's not enough to survive. I don't want that for my family, and I know none of you would accept that for yours. We know that more than half of the families in the world, representing 4.7 billion people, live below the economic empowerment line. That marker where families have sufficient income to invest in housing and education, energy and water for the household, access to healthcare and sanitation, and improved nutrition to thrive for the long term. This is where generational change occurs. And to support that vision, I'm really proud to announce Project Fury, IDE's campaign to redefine what prosperity looks like, one that focuses on the positive force of women and the urgency of the challenges that families and communities face globally. Those of you in this room know the power of small business, and there's a growing movement that recognizes the untapped potential of women and women entrepreneurs in particular. In my years at IDE, I've seen it over and over again that when women thrive, everyone thrives. This is a fundamental truth that undergirds Project Fury, yet we need your support. Imagine the resources we could apply to this approach if everyone here at the Concordia Summit increased their funding for women and women entrepreneurs in the Global South. We're not here to just educate and learn. That's not enough. We're here to act. We know what needs to happen, and we're calling on the resources, the influence, and the fury in this room to take action. Just like Salima and Alice and so many other women we've partnered with, we'll go about this work with a fury, and we ask that you step up Commit and join us.
Hell hath no fury like a woman. Like a woman empowered. Like a woman successful. Like a woman who wants her kids to go to school. Like a woman who wants to pull her community out of poverty. She's the first ripple to a huge wave of change. Her positive energy creates progress, inspires others, and paves the way to a brighter future. Hell hath no fury like a woman entrepreneur. We're working to power 1 million women entrepreneurs to impact millions of people. And we're doing it with a fury. Join us. Project Fury, igniting the power of women to end poverty.